Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Ulster Knife Company and the history of Ulster Knife Company. It's another amazing story of accomplishment from a immigrant who came from Sheffield, England, started a company in America. Stories repeated over and over again in the knife community among knife companies in early American history. Fascinating and pretty representative of the American ideal, I think. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go ahead and check out the video. Hey, welcome back to the Fortified Castle. Hi, all my viewers. Bonjour, privet, guten tag, hola, ciao, konnichiwa, and good day, mate, to my foreign viewers. And today we're going to be looking at Ulster Knife Company. I have a few other knives. It's one of my poorest sub-collections, actually. This is all I have of Ulster. I haven't really, collected them. I've got a few that are representative of Ulster Knife Company and some different examples, some of their contract knives. And so, we'll be able to touch base and look at them, but the history is the most fascinating part of these knives. They're not the most collectible knives. If you want to collect Ulster knives, it's better to collect the old ones like this, Dwight Divine and Sons, Ulster Knife Company. That tang stamp right there. These are older. They stretch back into the 1800s under Dwight Divine. And so, yeah, these are very well made, comparable to Case and to Schrade Cutlery Company. The newer Ulster models, the older ones around the end of World War II were pretty good knives, but towards the 60s, they just became really inexpensively made knives. And we'll talk about all of that. And let me just say thanks to all my viewers. I really appreciate your support. Coming up on 2,000 here soon. Seems incredible to me. But it's not all my content and my doing. I've had a lot of help from other content providers, and I just want to thank them for all the help they've given me, along the way, and continue to give me. And many of them who have become friends, and many that I respect. So thanks a lot to them, and especially to you, the viewer, who watches my video and supports me by likes, shares, and comments. So thanks again. Let's get into the history of this. All right, so this story starts out in Sheffield, England, with a cat named William Booth. And so at the age of 14, imagine that, 14 years old, he starts his apprenticeship for becoming a cutler. And those apprenticeships lasted 7 years in England before you could win your freedom. And what actually happened in the 1800s is once you started apprenticeship, you kind of belonged to that guy. And they called it winning your freedom when you finished your apprenticeship. In those days, you started on very basic tasks and worked your way up until you were making a complete knife, every part of it. And after that, over the years, you might become a master cutler, which William Booth became. And so after his 7 years apprenticeship, he's around 21, 22. He sails for America and lands in Bronxville, New York. Bronxville, New York. And he worked for a company there. I'm not familiar with any knife company located in Bronxville, New York. So that's kind of interesting, trying to figure out, what company he was working for. But he moved to Naugatuck, Connecticut, and started working with Connecticut Cutlery Company. And then finally in 1871, he started his own company as a cooperative. And so that is, he talked some other Sheffield cutlers in to starting a knife company. And they went in together, and everybody kind of shared in the profits and the hardships and blah, blah, blah. And so that company failed within a year. And that's kind of typical because they were still competing against English companies, which had 70% of the U.S. market. And you also had American competitions from companies like Holly Manufacturing, New York Knife Company, a lot of competition from American companies as well. And so in 1872, the company failed. Local businessmen in the town took over the business and tried to revive it, but they didn't do much better. So by 1875, that endeavor failed too. And that's when Dwight Divine, who at the time was a banker, but he was also a Civil War hero, came on the scene and took over the company. And from there on, it skyrocketed. And that's another story as part of the American dream. Often it's that one individual that makes a difference. Company had failed twice. Divine takes it over. He's got some business skills. He's got some acumen. He has some vision. And he takes the company to a successful business. So when William Booth started the company, he named it the Ellenville Cooperative Cutlery Company. That lasted a year. When the town businessmen took the company over, they named it Connecticut Cutlery Company. And that failed within 3 years. Dwight Divine named the company Ulster Knife Company, and that's where we get the name. And that was the primary name of that company in the marking on the knives. But in 1900, he changed it to this tank stamp right here, Dwight Divine and Sons. He had brought his sons on into the company, and he was giving them credit and giving them a foothold in the company. These knives were really well made, really well made knives, and if you can get a hold of them, they're well worth getting them. I don't know how far back he might have used Dwight Divine. I've read that he kind of used Dwight Divine and Ulster intermittently through those years from 1876 up. So it's kind of hard to figure that tank stamp out. In 1933, Dwight passed away. His sons had been working in the business for a while, and so they took over the business. That is after the stock market crash in 1929. In the midst of the crash, of the Great American Cutlery Crash. So they had a hard time, and by 1941 they sold the company to Albert and Henry Bear. So they become owners of Ulster Knife Company, and they simply adopted the name Ulster Knife Company. Very early knives from that period, 1941, 1942, might have Dwight Divine and Sons. Part of the agreement to take over the company was that they not use his name. And so I think relatively quickly that passed away. So Albert and Henry Bear, as you might recognize the name, not only owned Ulster Knife Company, but they bought Schrade Cutlery Company in 1946. And so that's how you probably know that name. Now, in 1941, they also, so they bought Ulster and then almost immediately entered into a cooperative agreement with Imperial Schrade to produce knives for the U.S. government during the war effort. Together, those two companies produced more than half of all knives that the United States military used. As part of that, they developed a scheme, and the scheme was to create a fictitious company to bid on U.S. contracts. And that company was Kingston Knife Company. So it was just on paper. And this is a Kingston, USA knife right here. And this knife was made by Ulster in the Ulster plant in Ellenville. And it is a pretty good knife. This doesn't date back to the wartime, I don't believe. I think this is a 1950s knife, actually. But it's a well-made knife. It's better than most Ulster knives that you'll see. These knives over here are Ulster knives, and this knife is better than that. So here's another one. It's a Kingston, USA electrician's knife. Really unusual. I'll show you why. So it looks like a electrician's knife, same blade configuration, but when you look at the profile of this, it's kind of, instead of being flat like a TL29, it kind of swells out in width. Not necessarily in the depth of it, but in the width of the knife. Pretty unusual. It's a fairly good knife. Pretty good knife. And so in 1945, the war ends. And then in 1947, the corporation Kingston USA is dissolved. But Ulster continued to use that Tang stamp, which, by the way, Dwight Divine and Sons used also. So Ulster continued to use that Tang stamp up to 1958. So this knife, or this knife, could be dated, up to 1958. Okay, so in 1947, the cooperative agreement that Imperial and Ulster had was codified. Okay, so they became a joint company called Imperial Knife Associated Companies. A lot of people say that Imperial bought out Ulster. If that was true, it wouldn't be Imperial Knife Associated Companies. Not only that, Ulster never changed their stock. That's common in mergers. where the stock of the merging company is changed. And so one company merges with the other company, this stock goes away, it becomes a subsidiary of the parent company with the parent company stock. That didn't happen with Ulster. So I believe that Albert Bear kept his independence from Imperial. They just worked very closely together, each helping each other make knives when they needed to make them. And that's just my opinion on that. So let's see. Let me show you this first. So this is a Hibbett, Bartlett, and Spencer. They went out of business in 1960. Yep, 1960. And so they were a hardware concern. A lot of companies made knives for them. I think this knife is an Ulster knife. It looks and feels like an Ulster knife. These knives right here, this is an Ulster. You see that right there, Ulster USA. And you can see the similarities between these two. Almost exactly the same jigging. So I think this is an Ulster knife right here. Camillus, Ulster, Schrade all made knives for Hibbett, Bartlett, and Spencer, and other companies earlier. So at this time frame when this knife is made, I think this is a Craftsman. By the way, I think the shield probably said Craftsman, and here's a Craftsman right here. You can see the oval shield, pretty much exactly the same. And this, by the way, is unusual. This Craftsman has Ulster USA, so that's kind of unusual because oftentimes it said Craftsman on there, and you can see the Craftsman shield. So that's kind of cool that we actually have a tang stamp on here identifying this as an Ulster knife. But these are really inexpensive knives. So they had lost all that fineness that they had early on. And here's another one right here. Now this one's not a bad little knife. So this was probably, you see the Ulster USA. Tang stamp with the model number right there. Pretty little knife. Well made. And almost exactly like the Kingston. Pretty close. So, by 1972, Albert Bear discontinued the Ulster trademark. And that was the end of the Ulsters. You see these Boy Scout knives. Ulster first made Boy Scout knives when it was Divine and Sons, 1923 to 1940. And then Ulster didn't make any knives for Boy Scout until 1963 after the war. And they continued to make knives up until 1972 when they when the name was dissolved. So this would date between that time period right there, between 1960 and 1972. They had the round shield with the Boy Scout emblem on it. These aren't bad knives at all, by the way. And Ulster, worked with Camillus, and Camillus made a lot of knives for them. So sometimes Ulster would make parts, send them to Camillus, and Camillus would put them together. So a lot of times these Ulsters, which were probably sent to Camillus, are pretty good knives, where the Sears ones put together by Ulster were less quality, a little less quality on them. I'm not saying these are junk. I'm just saying they're a little less quality than the Camillus made ones. And that's pretty interesting. Let's pop this open. It's a nice little Boy Scout knife. I got this thing for $11 in an antique store. And let's see where I was. Where was I? Iowa. I was out there by Tom Knife Delights in Iowa, and stopped by an antique store and picked this up. They said they had no knives, by the way, but I went ahead and looked around, and there it was, sitting right there. So that is the story of Ulster, boys' knives, military. That's pretty much the story. It's a fantastic story, though. So you have an immigrant coming to the United States. He had a dream. He built his business. One thing I didn't mention, when Dwight Divine bought Connecticut Cutlery Company, Ellenville Cooperative Knife Company, when Dwight Divine bought that, he retained William Booth, by the way, the guy who founded the company. He was a master cutler, and so William Booth worked with Dwight Divine until he retired in 1923. And so, he didn't retain the ownership of the company, but he had the benefit to really the fine quality of the knives that Dwight Divine produced was because of William Booth. And, he achieved the American dream, as some did, a lot of them failed. And so that's the story. Really, knife companies like this are the story of America. Freedom, independence, the American dream, making your mark, becoming something. That's what the American dream's all about, and it's typified in these knife companies. So I hope you enjoyed the story, and thank you so much for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video.